Ryan from SilksReadingSupplies.com. Congratulations on your new Riley Hopkins press. Before you get printing with it, we want to ensure that you know how to set it up and use it and adjust it properly. So we brought the expert in here, Riley Hopkins himself, to show me how to set this up. I'm going to be assisting him throughout the process, so I'll just hand it over to him and we'll get started.
Great. Well, thanks again for purchasing this press. This thing should last at least 30 years and not have any problems if you treat it right, so that's why we want to start this thing off on the right foot. On your bags, when you parts bags, there'll be some instructions that basically tell you what to do. In this case, we're going to be setting up the base first, and then we'll put this upper section on it, and then lastly we'll put the print stations on it. So this information is contained on the outside of your bag, so refer to it on a regular basis. There's also a set of instructions here too on how to operate this press, and quite often this winds up sitting in the bottom of the boss's drawer and not near the press. So please read it and familiarize yourself with it. The adjustments are very simple, but if you don't follow the instructions, you're in harm's way. So anyway, the first thing we're going to do here is find the spare leg leveler. We're going to flip this guy upside down. We're going to put this center leg leveler right in the middle of this guy. The reason we've done this is to make sure there's no bounce in this press base. And when you turn this upside down, you'll notice that there's also a brace welded into the bottom of this tube, so there's no flex in the bottom of this thing either. So we're ready to go. We're going to start this all the way down in the bottom. Okay, so you might want to set this up on top of something so you're not groveling in the cement. These bolts are just finger tight.
And we're using the short bolt on that
And
bottom adjustment?
And that also comes up from the bottom. It's the only one that does. Now also, one other thing that's a bit of trivia, but it's nice to know. There's two sides to a washer. There's the punch side and there's the sharp side. So I always like to try and get the smooth side next to the powder. When you look at it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Now once these are all in, we're going to want to tighten these guys up. You can see how nicely these ratchet wrenches work. They're really cool. So then we'll go through the rest of this.
Now, do you tighten all these at once, all the way down tight, or do we wait till everything's set down?
Well, basically, I don't have a problem setting these things up tight one at a time. It's just that when you're first working these three bolts together, there's a little bit of clearance in there, so you want to set the bolts in loose before you tighten them up.
Okay, let's put the rest down.
Great. Okay, so now we've got this, all the legs down. We want to make sure there's no rock in the bottom of this, so there are 4 adjustable leg levelers. Try and work the two sides opposite each other first, and then hit the second one. This is now in reasonable shape.
Should be able to push on it and not tilt back and forth?
Correct. Why don't we lift this up?
This is definitely a two-person job.
Yep. So what we're going to do is pull this over just a little bit. Whoops. Should be about there. Let's check this back side just a little bit. Then let's try putting the 4 center bolts in first.
I think we got to line her up a little. Kind of look down through here and see the holes underneath.
These center bolts are very important, but they're a little difficult to get in, so that's the reason you want to start those off first. We're going to be using a 1/2-inch wrench, and that'll allow us to sneak in here and get these done. You might want to put your finger on the top of the bolt to give it a little bit of resistance so it doesn't spin back and forth on you. These bolts are basically there to make sure that there's a maximum amount of strength in this plate. Even though it's a 1/2 inch thick, you're still putting an awful lot of pressure by the time you're printing out on the end of a shirt board. So this hooks up with this 1/2 inch hooks up with a 1/4 inch top of the base top. So it gives you 3/4 of an inch, which is pretty Herculean. We're going to throw in this last of the 4 outer bolts on the base to secure this and get those tightened up. And then we're ready to pull the print heads down. These are shipped in the up position, so it takes up the absolute least amount of space. So when you put the arm down, you want to kind of make sure that there's no chance for it to come back up. So you put this blue bumper material on the bolt that goes through this thing. Put a washer on it. The top nut just goes on finger tight. You don't want to use a wrench on this at all because you don't want to preload this bracket for any reason at all. The bracket's already set up to handle an axle below here, which has some oilite bushings, and those have been preset so that the torque is the same on all of these, so that the arm will go up and down properly. So this will actually come up into that position. That's the way the print heads work. Okay, so next, now that we've got these arms in place, we're going to start putting the print stations on. You'll notice that the print heads are all numbered, as are the print stations themselves. So we're going to want to go with number 1 on the number 1 print station. And an easy way to do this is to just tap the dowel pins through just a little bit. At the factory, we set these presses up and adjust them so they're correct when you get them. You'll notice that there are 2 randomly drilled dowel holes as well as some scribe marks as well. So what we're going to do is use a couple of vice grips, which we've put some electrical tape on, and we'll clip these in place. So what we're going to want to do is just start where these dowel pins are and let that be the starting point. Okay, this electrical tape is on there so that we're not screwing up the powder coating. And this next bag has all of our print station bolts.
And which side of the bolt goes through on the front?
I like to have the bolt heads sticking out so that the nuts are on the back. And the 2 washers, of course, one on either side, with smooth side facing the powder.
And we're using 9/16 wrench for this?
That's correct. There's a couple of 9/16 if you need them. Having build over 20,000 of these presses worldwide. I've often wondered why I haven't gone into the 9/16 wrench business because there's at least one set that goes with each press. Now for people that are overseas, you can get by with a 14 millimeter set of wrenches for this as well. All right, now that we've got this rascal put together, we can tap these dowel pins through so they're about half and half, and then you know that they're fully in place. Now if this press ever comes apart, if you're going to ship it or move it, make sure that these print stations stay the same. If you've got a couple of these, make sure that the print stations for each press stay with that particular press. If you accidentally scramble them up, somebody's going to be unhappy, because each one of these things is a little different. So next we can put the shirt boards on this guy. And typically, with any of the knobs on this press, what I like to advocate is twisting as far as you can with just your fingers, and then grab it with your hand and give it a quarter of a turn for everything on this press, including the shirtboard brackets. This tubing here is as light as I can possibly make it, so that the rotating weight on this thing is as little as possible. But while you're doing that, if Godzilla comes in here and tightens this thing up, eventually you can start bending the bottom of the tube. So you want to make sure that you take it easy on the knobs. Screen printer.
On the knobs, you tighten the left side first or the right side first, and
Yes.
then the bottom?
Right. And also put your hand fully across the shirt board, because the side knob exerts a little bit of torque. It'll want to tip the board. Now we can spin this around and make sure everything's doing what it's supposed to do. And notice these detents aren't supposed to actually stop the press. It's just when you stop the press where you're printing, that detent will fall into the groove and just keep it from going nuts on you. But it'll also allow you to advance to the next print station very easily.
Right, so is this press pretty much set up?
Yeah, it is. We're about ready to enter into putting a screen in here and setting off contact and that sort of thing.
Okay, let's get going.
All right. Okay, on each job, the platen position is just a little bit different. So you want to check the arc to make sure that where you're putting your positive is actually going to fit the press. Quite often I'll just use my hand on it and replicate that for the rest of the locations. For setting the job up, we're going to want to have a control. So we'll use the number 1 print station and we'll use the number 1 print head, because those are the two references that we use at the factory to set this press up. So we're going to want to go all the way down into here, and this feels just a little bit tight. There we go.
And this part right here we're going to, this is a registration gate?
Yes. One of the things that I did in these new presses, I went to a 2-inch center shaft, which is quite Herculean. It's got some really large tapered roller bearings. We don't use grease on these. We use STP because it thoroughly penetrates the metal, and the speed that this rotates at is so slow that grease will actually start to harden up and dry after a couple of years and not actually lubricate. So that's what we use on the center of this thing. My previous presses had the registration back about 40% closer to the center of the press. So I've moved the registration points out 40% closer to the screen. That's what this 5-inch block is. And I've also changed the grip from 3.5 inches back here to 5 inches all the way out on the front. So this wide base registration system has really made a big difference in terms of being able to grab the print head correctly and support it. So this has been a nice upgrade. When this press is set up, there are stop bolts on the gate itself and also on the back as a safety bolt for the print head itself. So this number 1 and 1 is the control that we use for leveling all the rest of the print stations. We set the first one up, get it right, and then we put everything else in agreement with this first print station. So let me show you this sideways here a little bit. To set off contact, there are 2 vertical slots that you can see through the front of the clamp, and there's also a top tilt bolt. The hole itself is about 1/2 inch. The bolt going through it is 3/8, so it's got the ability to tilt if the back end of the screen frame is warped a little bit, which is on wood especially is quite often the case. So to set up the off contact correctly, I like to use a shim that basically fools the press into thinking that it's laying flat with itself.
So what size should that be? How thick?
Yeah, about 1/8 inch seems to be a good place to start. And you want to tape that in place so it doesn't move around, because you're going to be putting your positives on top of this. But for example here, we'll just go ahead and do it without any kind of speciality. And what we want to do is to have this screen lay dead flat on this platen. So what we're going to be doing, thank you, is loosening these guys up.
And you're using a 9/16 wrench for that?
Yep, same cool guy ratchet wrench.
So basically right now we're leveling the press out.
Yep. So you're going to want to give it a little karate chop right here. Make sure that this is all the way down in the gate. You want to make sure that this is loose so that this screen can lay all the way down in the gate and be dead flat with everything that you've got. So then what you're going to do is snug this up just a little bit on the outer side. Tighten this end up. Tighten your tilt bolt if this thing is laying where it's supposed to be. Tighten that up and tighten up your last off contact slot. Now there's another bolt down here in the bottom. That's preset at the factory. It's supposed to be just snug. It's not supposed to be tight, because you want to be able to rotate this just a little bit if you have to. If for some reason you have problems getting this tilt to happen, chances are somebody has accidentally tightened this bottom bolt up. So you can loosen that up just enough to allow this to create the tilt that you need. So once you've registered all your screens and the artwork is where you want it, you can test print it if you're happy with it. You can pull the platen out, and this will give you the off contact that you set over here. Now, one last thing that I like to do as well is to put an off contact shim of the same basic thickness on the outer end of the screen to support the screen during the print stroke, because you're putting a lot of pressure on this thing, and the farther out you go, the more of a lever you've got. So if you've got this to where it's supported on the outer end, the 40 pounds of pressure you put during the print stroke is going to be supported out here. So your off contact will be uniform throughout the whole print stroke. And that's the objective.
Now, this is a question we get from customers. That kind of takes the place somewhat of side clamps.
Right. Well, basically what goes on with side clamps, I mean, I've as a race car guy, I like to get in and out of the pits as quick as possible. And for me, side clamps are for large screen format. I designed this press for a 23-inch width screen maximum capacity, which you don't really need side clamps for. On my old presses that were 26 inches, yeah, side clamps were something that you would want to use. But for something this narrow, you don't really need to use them. And I really prefer to make one set of adjustments instead of two, just for speed. We have a number of these presses that are used as test presses for automatics, which are 23 31-inch frames, and those work quite well. They have to have a longer print station because for an automatic the image is farther out on the screen, but we don't have any problem with the screens moving around or anything else. So as long as you're at 23 inches, back clamp is fine and dandy. All right, one of the things that's interesting about this particular press is that this is a joystick press as opposed to a micro press. And when I invented this thing, it happened quite by accident. I was trying to figure out a way of getting around micros and taking some expense out of the press. And at about 3 in the morning, this idea came to me, and I raced out in the shop and produced it, and it actually worked. So one of the things about this is you're using your two hands, and for some unknown reason they follow each other. So you can look straight into the image all the time. You don't have to look back and forth to see where you're going. So you have quite a bit of control when you're adjusting the press. There's also another feature of this that will tell you real quick if you've got the screen leveled correctly with a platen. If you're having a stiff adjustment with a joystick, basically that's telling you you need to go back in here and adjust this subtly so that there's no load. There's a little bit of clearance in between these plates, so if it's off just a little bit, it'll provide some drag on here. So that's kind of a built-in way to tell you that you need to give a little more attention to these three bolts to make sure this is dead simple to use. So once you're done, tighten that back up as much as you can with your fingers and 1/4 of a turn. On these bolts for the screen clamp, by the way, if you've registered your screen, do not come back in and put more pressure on these knobs, because this is just a glorified C-clamp, and the more you twist them, the more you open the jaws and the more you change your image location. So do yourself a favor, set this torque correctly to begin with, and don't mess with it again.
When you're starting to register a job, what position should the joystick be in?
Well, I'd like to see it be basically in the middle, so you've got a full range of motion. When we ship these from the factory, we've got the joystick in the full back position, so it takes up the least amount of space in the crate. But when you're starting it out, try and get it just about in the middle like we've got it here.
What kind of leeway do you have through the joystick movement?
What I like to see happen is the three elements of screen making all put together at the same time, wherein you have a basic image of where the screen is going to be, where the image is going to be, and how that fits the shirt board, where the distance is from the back of the shirt board to the front face of the clamp should be about 1 inch, so you've got some room, and where the back of the screen is going to be. If you center line all this stuff, then your artist knows that the image has to fit the shirt board. The person who's burning the screen is going to put the screen in the back position, center that up, and put the image where it's supposed to be. And then the printer, when they set the press up, it's going to be very close to begin with. So the total turnaround time is much, much faster than if all those three elements are separate from each other and you got to chase it around.
So now that we've set the press up, you're going to be using this press for years to come. And there are some maintenance issues and some things that you don't want to do on the press to ensure the quality and the lifespan of the machine. Riley, why don't you touch on some of those?
Well, there's a interesting controversy that's been going on for about 35 years over nylon bolts versus steel bearings with steel registration plates and that sort of thing. Personally, I've chosen to use a sacrificial part, which are these nylon bolts, so it doesn't score the aluminum bolt or the aluminum registration block, which goes out 4 decimal points. And if this gets worn, the press won't work. We have had some rocket scientists replace these nylon bolts with steel and then wonder why the press is shot. So that's one of those things that's a preference deal. I've not had problems with this for the 35 years that we've been building these presses, but other salesmen like to point it out as though there's some sort of a big bugaboo for using them. But if there was a bugaboo, we wouldn't be selling as many presses as we do and have them in service for as long as we do.
Well, it makes pretty good sense. You don't have metal rubbing on metal. And then how much does this part cost to replace, and how often do you think it needs to be replaced?
Well, that's a bone-crushing $3 a piece, and there's a good 5 years worth of wear on these things. So the other deal on that too is that when you set this clearance, you don't need to put it in tight. You can kind of finger tighten it and then just go about 1/4 of a turn on the jam nut, because this is nylon, and if you treat it like a regular bolt, you'll snap the head of the thing off. Then it's $3.
So this is the jam nut right here?
That's correct.
Okay, you want to tighten that down so the bolt doesn't move out.
Right, just a little bit.
And as the bolt wears down, you'll start to maybe feel a little bit give, and then you just give it. Do you have to tighten them both at the same distance?
Basically, it's up to you. It depends on where your center line is, where your screen is. Typically, what I like to do is just have, check the press in the morning to make sure that it's copacetic. If it's got a little play in it, just tighten it up and you're there.
Good. Now, we noticed that a lot of presses register and you can adjust the off contact differently.
Mm-hmm.
This center line gate bolt right here, it's typically, on some other presses, on very basic presses, you take a bolt like that to adjust the off contact.
Right.
In this case, it says do not touch here. What is the purpose of this bolt?
Well, there are some philosophical differences about adjusting that position up and down for off contact. And if you look at this thing from an engineering standpoint and trace the trajectories of all of these angles, we set this up so that this registration block and print arm is just slightly down. So when this comes up, the liftoff for the screen is as close as we can get it to a straight line. But if somebody starts horsing around with this thing for an instant off contact, all of a sudden the press will not print correctly.
Because you guys register these at the factory, so they're all relative to each other.
That's correct. And the other thing is there's this term leveling, and occasionally we'll get somebody that says, well, gee, we leveled the press and it wasn't level. And so we go, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, we put a level on this thing and it wasn't level. Well, the only place that leveling has anything to do with anything is the center of the press right here, just to set the rotation. When we set these presses up at the factory, all we're trying to do is make sure that each one of these platens is relative to the control platen, so they all print the same. They may be slightly off. One might be higher than the other, but in reality, when you put the screen in, they all hit at exactly the same place.
So the leveling is relative to itself, not the surface of the earth.
Correct, correct. But there again, that's part of this rocket science thing. This press is very, very, very simple as long as you use our instructions. If you don't, all is lost.
What are some other maintenance things you need to do? Talk a little bit about spring replacement, how long those last, if there's any spots on the press you need to lubricate.
These springs are sort of relative. In the 35 years that we've been using these springs, I've never had a spring company give me a warranty on them ever. So it's kind of a crapshoot. Some people have to replace springs about every 10 years, something like that. To do that, it's pretty simple. You put the arm in the down position, take this top stop bolt out, lift the arm straight up, and it'll relax the back end of the springs so you can replace them. But typically, you shouldn't have to be replacing springs on a regular basis at all. This has a spring protector on it as well, so that we're not talking about a whole bunch of shrapnel. In terms of the bushings on this, these are oil impregnated oilite bushings that have a flange on them. So this is pre-lubed for life. Occasionally on a press that's maybe 10 to 20 years old, when you, let's put this back over into this center position, you may find that there's just a little bit of side-to-side play at the outer end of the screen. And the big rebuild secret is that these nylon bolts become a fulcrum for this lever.
Okay.
So you go back and pretend that you're going to be replacing the springs. You take this top bolt out, relax the springs, and then tighten this axle bolt up until the arm stays at an angle. Back out just a little bit, crack the wrenches loose just to the point where the arm drops, and you can set all of these print heads the same way. It'll get rid of all the side play, and you've basically rebuilt your press in about 5 minutes.
But you're talking 15, 20 years down the road.
Correct.
So even 15, 20 years down the road, the maintenance issues are very, minimal, and
Right.
these presses are really built to last.
Well, not only that, I mean, I've gone way out of my way to make sure that no presses are obsoleted. Some of my original stuff from the early 70s, all the new accessories, jacket hold downs, sleeve boards, any of that stuff, fits on the old presses as well as the new, primarily because this 1.5-inch, 2.5 tube has always remained the same. And the basic geometry between all of this, I've tried to keep it common.
And last question here on the maintenance things. Do we need to lube any parts of the press at all?
Well, more than lubing, I just want to make sure that everybody keeps the press clean. There's a variety of things you can do, but starting out, before you even start using the press, if you spray it down with WD-40 or something like that, some people like to use PAM, but basically, I just like to see this thing really spotless. If you're using a lot of spray tack, it gets all over everything. And a press that hasn't been cleaned kind of looks like a yak after a while, and it's not my most favorite picture to think about, one of my babies in the field looking like that. But in terms of lubing or cleaning or anything like that, you just want to make sure that you're not getting overspray into these areas as far as adhesive goes. This has a light 3-in-1 oil on it, so that's pretty straightforward.
So if we do need to lube this up a couple years down the road, we would use that 3-in-1 oil?
That's correct.
And the center bearing we don't have to do anything with typically?
No. But if it does come apart and you're worried about it, just use a little STP on the bearing cones. Then there's 4 of those in here. One on the bottom and one on the top of the bottom section, one on the bottom of the wheel, and one on the top section of the wheel. And typically, this top nut compresses this whole thing, and it's kind of like on a wheel bearing. You want to tighten it up to where it's tight, and then back it off about 1/4 of a turn. You might also want to just keep an eye on this, because sometimes this will loosen up a little bit, and that'll allow for a little bit of play. So while you're checking the nylon bolts, you might also want to give that a touch too, just to make sure that that hasn't loosened up for some reason.
Okay, so if you basically keep your press clean and make sure, it's very important that everyone in your shop knows how to use the press and knows what adjustments are needed to make on the press. Basically the only 3 adjustments: the 2 off contact bolts and the tilt bolts.
Right.
You're pretty much good to go for quite a long time.
Well, that's true, but you need to make sure that whoever's going to touch this press knows what they're doing, and shoot the person that touches the stop bolts. Serious, because you're screwing up the press. That simple.
Okay, well, very important. Do not touch.
Whoa.
All right, well, that pretty much concludes the setup, registration, and adjustment of the Riley Hopkins press. Now, this is a Win series press. We also have Arrow series press and a lowrider press that have a square base. Basically the same adjustments needed on those presses, except they have a square base, so you don't have to set the base up.
Right, and the same set of bolts that go on this Win series press also go on the square base as well, so it's the same setup.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for showing us how to do that.
Yeah,